Well, hello again and welcome back to your favourite classic dirt bike TV channel. And our first announcement, of course, is that we have now surpassed that 12,000 subscribers total. So that's thanks to each and every one of you out there in YouTube land for your continuing support by looking at my video content. So hopefully it won't be too long before we're now into the 13,000 bracket for subscribers. Now, of course, just recently we've been on a 2-day photo shoot in the south of the country to film Rob Hughes' fantastic collection of old race bikes. Now, he has some very nice classics in his collection, and we will be featuring each and every one of Rob's bikes here on my channel in the coming weeks and months. So if you're not already a subscriber, then please get on board just in case you miss out on some of those fantastic machines. Now we're going to kick off with the first of Rob's bikes, and this is a lovely fully restored EMC 250 that was put together by Alec Middleton. Alec's made a fantastic job of this little bike, so we're going to take a look at this machine right now. So I do hope you enjoy looking at this EMC 250. Now, EMC, or Eatough Motocross Components to give the company their full title, was actually formed by Mike Eatough, who worked originally with Rolls-Royce and later began by building motorcycle frames for the great Alan Clues at CCM. And even at one time, Mike Eatough was an AMCA motocross champion, so you can gather that he was well experienced when it came to building and racing off-road motorcycles. Now then, of course, sometime later, Mike Eatough would then go on to form his own bike manufacturing company and set up his brand new EMC venture in an old disused cotton mill in Bolton, which ironically was actually in the very same street as the Bolton-based CCM brand. Now, our featured EMC is a fully restored 1977 250 model, and this bike was originally just boxes of old bike parts up until, of course, Alec Middleton then worked his magic on this bike and put it all back into this original and almost as brand new condition. And this is not unlike the kind of bike that you would have seen in a showroom in 1977. Now, back in the day, these EMCs would have had a variety of different engines fitted in these chrome plated chassis, and many were fitted with the Austrian made Rotax 2-stroke motors, and it's said that there were also around 6 that also had the Czechoslovakian CZ engine fitted. But most of these power plants did work very well in this superbly engineered Eatough frame, and this German-made Sachs motor is still regarded as one of the more powerful of the 3 derivatives. Now, in this particular shot, you can see the superb welding and engineering of these Eatough chassis, and also if you look closer, you can just see how the front of the cooling fins on the Sachs motor have been machined away, and this was done so that they could place the motor as far forward in the frame as possible, which was of course all done just to get the geometry of the bike absolutely correct to improve the handling. Now, the engine is a conventional piston port 2-stroke motor that has a 7-speed gearbox and a wet multi-plate clutch. Now, the piston also has a single Dykes piston ring, and it has a bore of 71.5 and a stroke of 61 millimeters, and the ignition was by way of the electronic motoplat system, and it's said that these little 2-stroke motors put out about 32 brake horsepower. Now, for our techie viewers who understand all the technical stuff of these engines, the gearbox on these Sachs motors had 2 main shafts that carried first through to 4th gears. Now the third shaft carried 2 fixed gears, which then of course multiplied second, third and fourth gears, just to give you a total of 7 speeds. But these gears had a narrow ratio but were very strong, and they could certainly keep your left leg very busy changing up and down the box during a race moto. Although in terms of their overall power output, these Sachs engines were very reliable, they were very tough, and as you'd expect, they could also rev to the moon and back with that relatively short stroke that it possessed. Now for such a small 250, the motor normally used a 36mm Bing carburettor to feed it with its fuel, and the air was also supplied through a foam filter which was housed inside a plastic airbox. Now access to the filter for servicing was through this little door underneath the seat, which also doubled up as part of the rear mudguard assembly. Now many of the parts that went in to construct these EMCs came from all over Europe, and in reality only the bike's chassis and exhaust expansion chamber was actually made at the factory. Now these front forks were Italian made Marzocchis, which for the period were a decent suspension system, and they were used on a variety of other different motocross bikes of that era. Now EMC also made improvements to these front forks by adding extra length onto the bottom of the fork legs to increase the length of the travel at the front end, and in this shot you can see just where the extension was made on the bottom of each fork stanchion. Now Mike Itoff also used these Czechoslovakian CZ brake hubs on the front and rear of these EMCs, and this again was in keeping with the philosophy of that it was much quicker and much cheaper to buy in already tried and tested parts rather than the more expensive option of tooling up to make your own components. But these were still decent motorcycle parts, and they worked very well on this British built machine. Now once again the bike's builder, Alec Middleton, has fitted period correct rear shocks to this EMC, although the actual maker's origins escape me at this moment, but I do expect that they may be Italian Marzocchis again, or possibly even early Girlings. But one thing's for sure, Alec will certainly have made sure that these were the correct items that were fitted to the EMC back in 1977. Now once again, these plastic EMC fuel tanks were manufactured locally in Cheshire in the UK by a private company, and then of course added to the many parts supply to build these EMC 250s. Of course these were cheaper and lighter than an equivalent alloy or steel tank, and this also helped to keep the all-up weight of the bike to a decent level. Now even the bike's builder Alec Middleton has managed to save the tank's original dealership stamp, and this is Doug Hacking's dealership logo, who was the local Bolton distributor of these EMC motorcycles back in 1977. So you don't get any more authentic than that kind of provenance for a fully restored dirt bike motorcycle. Now in the early days of Mike Itoff's company, they were originally known as EMC, or Itoff Motocross Components, but they then had to change their business name to EMX after a lengthy legal wrangle over the company's title. Now I expect that the main reason for chroming these EMC frames was to make it more appealing to potential buyers, although as I remember, CCM also did this back in the day for more than likely the very same reason, but soon then reverted back to painting their frames rather than having them chrome plated. But nevertheless, these ETOF chassis were certainly well designed and engineered, and of course very strong. And you can see the simple chain adjustment system at the end of the swing arm, which was a very quick and efficient way to tension the rear drive chain after a lengthy race moto. But again, this was all down to the ingenuity of Mike Etof's original design. Now, one of the other innovations of Mike Etof's motorcycle designs was the way that they constructed these two-stroke expansion chambers. Now, rather than using the now more common approach of seam welding various diameters of pipe together in sections, EMC basically took flat sections of steel and welded a seam on either side, and then hydraulically expanded both sections until they had the desired cone shape that they needed. Now, this was a very unique way to construct the desired shape needed to build one of these two-stroke exhausts, but by all accounts it worked extremely well. And to finish the pipe off, of course, they just added this quite small tailpipe at the rear, and the job was almost complete. Now, as far as I'm aware, every other part on this bike is as original as it was back in 1977, and the bike's front and rear plastics are again the originals, right down to those Etof motorcycle stickers on this rear mudguard. But to see one of these old 1977 EMC 250s with all their original parts is very rare. Now, you still do come across the odd EMC 250 going around with the more common Rotax two-stroke motor in the chassis, but for me personally, this is the very first Sachs engine bike that I've come across. So for that reason alone, that will give you an idea of just how rare this bike is, and it's thanks to Rob and of course the bike's builder Alec Middleton that we're even getting a chance to look at this fantastic piece of motocross history. Now, once again, all the bike's controls are as per 1977 with these Magura levers and their associated covers, although the chances are is that Alec has sourced new control cables to fit to the bike during its restoration, because Alec is a bit of a stickler for originality, and sometimes it can take him months of searching and digging just to try and source the proper original parts for his restorations. But back in the early days of EMC, I think Mike Etof had a workforce of around 10 or 12 employees at that time, and on average I think they were producing about 20 bikes a month. And they also had a few works riders on their books, including Irishman Robert Wilkinson, who was racing an EMC in the British Championship of that year. Now, of course, other notable racers of these EMCs were Bill Cocker, who raced one of these 250s in the AMCA Championships, and of course Britain's own the Cheshire Charger himself, Pete Mathia, also rode a 125 version of this bike back in the day. But EMC were said to be looking to develop a 400cc version of this bike, although I personally haven't heard or seen if that actually happened. But nevertheless, when EMC were in full flow, these machines sold in decent numbers, although unfortunately with the influx of the Japanese Big Four of Suzuki, Yamaha, Honda and Kawasaki bikes in the late 1970s and early 80s, small companies like EMC just couldn't compete on a level playing field with the might of the Japanese volume and price of their bikes, and it wasn't going to be too long before they'd be struggling to sell their products. So there you have it, the very first machine from the vast Rob Hughes Classic dirt bike collection. That's his fully restored 1977 EMC 250 Twinshocker. Well, I do hope you enjoyed that quite brief look around the first of Rob Hughes's fantastic race bikes, that beautiful EMC 250 that was put together by Alec Middleton. Now, of course, we have many more bikes like this coming up in my channel from the Rob Hughes Collection, and our next video posting we'll be taking a look at this beautiful 1973 CCM. Now, of course, these were the very first CCMs that Alan Clues ever produced. Of course, he did make bikes before this machine, which were called the Clues Strokers, but these 1973 CCMs were the very first bikes that carried that CCM title. So we'll be taking a look at that bike in our next video posting. So once again, thank you very much for your continuing support of my channel, and please return soon to take a look at your favourite classic dirt bike TV channel.